Hello, lovely people. Welcome to Ari Talks About Music. I'm Ari, and today I'll be reviewing the new Machine Gun Kelly album, Lost Americana. Lost Americana is the seventh album from the American rapper, singer, and musician Machine Gun Kelly, who since the beginning of his career has gone through many different styles and evolutions, starting off as a rapper in his early years and slowly going into a more pop punk and even kind of metal-leaning direction, to now on Lost Americana just going for a much more standard kind of pop rock sound. And notoriously, throughout every single one of his eras, Machine Gun Kelly has not exactly done the best job at any kind of music he's attempted to make, with so much of his music just coming across as annoying or even quite childish at times. And while for the most part Lost Americana is genuinely a departure from that kind of style, what we instead have is an album that I find to just be very bland more than anything. There are still a lot of moments in there that are reminiscent of a lot of his older material, but for the most part it is just a very generic pop rock album with very little substance to it. I think that Outlaw Overture, all things considered, is actually not too bad of an opening for the album. Just a pretty average pop rock track that, while quite generic, at least it's not as offensive as much of his earlier work. But that doesn't take away from how bland and predictable it is, whether that's the chord progressions, the lyrics, and even the annoying melodramatic tone that his voice takes at times. And I think that on the whole it does come across as very disingenuous. But I suppose, if nothing else, it at least makes a refreshing change from the kind of music I generally would expect from Machine Gun Kelly. And at the very least, I can still say that this song doesn't absolutely suck. Cliché is a song that I think absolutely lives up to its name, with even just the opening few seconds already just sounds like the most generic, standard, typical song that would have been popular around the late 2010s. And then after that, just the way it progresses and continues is just some of the most predictable music I have ever heard. And exactly as the title would have you think, it does use just about every single cliche that there is in modern pop music. Don't Wait, Run Fast takes on a slightly heavier sound with actually quite a decent guitar riff that opens the song. However, as strong as the start of the song is, it does then just go back to the super generic and predictable pop rock of the rest of the album. This song is kind of a weird one because it almost has that sound as if MGK is some late in the career rock icon, with this song just kind of having that strange kind of style when a rock veteran waters down their sound as they keep going. Except for the part where MGK is not only not exactly a rock icon who's released multiple classics, but also hasn't really even been going for that long. Then you have Goddamn, which is just a completely bland and generic acoustic guitar ballad. Absolutely nothing about the song makes it remotely enjoyable, and it has some of my personal favourite cringy lyrics of the album so far, most notably when he says, "I always knew my home was rock and rolling," with that one almost just being laughable of how stupid it sounds. And of course, we can't forget when he says, "I want my casket laced with Guns and Roses," which again not only sounds so stupid it's almost funny, but I feel like there are just so many other better classic rock bands he could have name dropped there than Guns N' Roses. Considering that they're a band that only really have one classic album, which even then it's one that a lot of people, me included, aren't even that big of a fan of. The next couple of tracks, Vampire Diaries and Miss Sunshine, are just more generic pop rock slop, and while I suppose I can find at least something to appreciate in the fact that they aren't actively horrible to listen to, I think that debatably there is even a case for the fact that they're so bland actually being even worse. Which then brings me to Sweet Coraline, which I think has to be arguably the most annoying song on the album, with that constant repetitive drum beat that is just there for the entire song, and despite the song being so short, coming in at only under 3 minutes, it still just feels like it's never going to end because of how annoying that drum beat is, just never going away or giving you any kind of a break. Indigo sees MGK going back to the slightly more hip-hop oriented sound, which he didn't do well back in the day, and surprise surprise, still isn't doing well now. I just find the rapping to be so annoying more than anything, and just completely devoid of any kind of passion or emotion, which I think is quite a shame that the vocals are such a big focus on this song, given that instrumentally I think this is actually one of the slightly better ones. Overall, with it just being so much more chill and low-key, which I think is something that this album just needed much more of at this point. But unfortunately, the instrumental is kind of just there to provide atmosphere, while the vocals are the main attraction on this song. Starman I find to be a particularly frustrating song, given that it's another one of those that almost lets you believe it's going to be good from the opening few seconds, but then of course it just can't help itself and goes straight back to the generic and predictable pop rock that this album has already provided far too much of. And then we get to the song Tell Me What's Up, which is one that just gives me so many conflicting feelings and confuses me greatly because it's actually kind of good. Hear me out. I find that the instrumental is for the most part nothing special, even having moments of being slightly annoying, but the lyrics are just like nothing I have ever heard before from MGK. The genuine maturity and profundity that he's displaying on this song is something I never even knew he had in him. Whether it's about aging or childhood memories or his public image, there is so much going on lyrically on this track that I think is incredible. And he genuinely seems to have a lot of interesting and important things to say on this song that do keep me interested in the whole thing. I even actually quite like the vocals on this track, having some genuinely good delivery, and you can tell that there is still a fair bit of emotion in his voice. But unfortunately, after that, the album then just goes back to what I would be typically used to expecting from it with Can't Stay Here, which I suppose I can somewhat appreciate for just being a nice, chill little ballad, but it still just commits a lot of the same sins as much of the rest of the album, mainly just the overly dramatic vocals and predictable structure. Although I will say that I think the guitar work on this track is genuinely quite good, even though it is very repetitive. Treading Water, if you can look past the cheesy lyrics and bland vocals, I think instrumentally is a pretty decent song. I do love the way it builds with these very epic, soaring guitars, with just the overall structure and the progression actually being really good, and I think is pretty much everything you would want to hear out of a modern rock song like this. And then Orpheus, unfortunately, does not end the album on a high, although to be fair, it's not exactly the lowest of lows either. Just another generic, predictable, and forgettable song that is just exactly what you would expect from the album at this point. And I really do just find that a piano ballad like this just does not at all suit MGK's voice and vocal style at all. And so while I think that this is not exactly the worst MGK album so far, that isn't really saying a lot because he's never really put out an album that I've fully enjoyed. I do find that this album is by far his most bland so far, which, like I said, I think there is genuinely a case for that actually being worse than music that is just straight up bad. Because at least on many of his previous projects, I mean, just look at his previous album, Mainstream Sellout. While that album absolutely sucks and overall is a worse experience to listen to than this one, in my opinion, at least it's interesting, albeit not for good reasons, but at least there are still things you can talk about. There is substance to the album. Whereas an album like this one, other than a handful of songs here and there, is just so bland and generic, there is very little interesting that you can actually say about it. But I do find it interesting that there is still a song on this album that, on the lyrical side of things, is genuinely fantastic. And I don't want to get my hopes up because I know that realistically it's not going to happen, but if MGK on future projects can actually make something out of that, I think we might even have another Quadeca kind of situation where he starts off making absolutely god-awful music, but somehow manages to turn it around and genuinely make some incredible stuff. Which, I mean, if he does do that, it would definitely have taken much longer than it did for Quadeca, but better late than never, I suppose. And so for now, this album will get a 3 out of 10 from me. Thank you so much for watching this review. Please be sure to listen to this album yourself and tell me your thoughts below. Please leave a like if you liked the video, and please leave a dislike if you didn't like the video, and remember to stay hydrated.